I wrote an essay called Technopoly, which is about the book by Neil Postman. And, his whole thing was that, any technology that comes in, we need to ask ourselves, 7 questions, what technology is it disrupting, and a lot of these things like you were talking about is, ecosystems or systems that something fails, something springs up, and it's almost inevitable, so it just really is a time horizon of when it happens. And so as these things come up, it's really about the values and the questions that we ask. But then also, like you said, is science has become this kind of scientism, this very religious kind of upbringing of totality, and that is something that I even at first, just because it got reinterested in science and the beauty of all these kind of ways of thinking, and that we can put a body of work together and all these kind of, it's just wild shit if you really want to look at it in that way. But here's the problem that I want to ask you about, is that this last thing is like, if we have a savior complex now, in a lot of things of science, it's like, well, we have some things that we need saving from, actually, you know what I mean? Not just climate change, but here's one technology that I want to see kind of how you parse this out and connect them, is the greatest technology of all is fusion energy, and that's kind of like been lauded as this thing that's almost here, but that's been perennial almost here for years and years. But then recently there has been some rumblings between the Chinese, their fusion reactors, but whatever you want to call about state stuff with that. And then the ITER in France, they're building that for the last decade. So well, let's get into like kind of the different energy sources, oil, gas, fossil fuels. We've gotten to somewhat of renewables. Oh, wow. Solar is kind of coming down. There's been a lot of those kind of things, but then we really need to get to the regenerative kind of thing. And the holy grail of energy sources for regeneration is the effing sun. You know what I mean? And so like, if we can do that here, then are all our problems solved? You know what I mean? Like that's kind of what it is. So we're still on this path. And so let's just riff on that a little bit.
Sure. So, the like cheap fossil fuels, when I realized what was happening with them, that has been like I don't know what the right word is, like some sort of framing idea for me. Like my whole life, I think a lot about like, does this thing exist because of cheap energy or not? And what does that mean for, all of these systems, for example? When I first realized like, oh yeah, fossil fuels are non-renewable. So like plastic gloves in hospitals, everything, you know what I mean? I'm just thinking
food containers, like
everything, everything like that we're just assuming will exist forever, like built our entire system around. I was listening to this podcast, at the Post-Carbon Institute, about net energy, and it's the same exact topic. It's basically like, I guess some of these manufacturing processes, and this is not my area of expertise, but some of these manufacturing processes require constant, they need to be constantly producing something. They can't stop, or the whole things in the system will like gum up and the whole system will break. So they require constant fossil fuel energy. And then this woman who was being interviewed was talking about how, for example, to make steel, like you have to have super, super high heat. And the only way to get that amount of high heat would be to like cut down so much of the world's forest to get like something equivalent to the high heat required for steel that is allowed by liquid fuels. Then she was talking about how, for example, how we run trucks around the US, and the battery required to move a truck at the scale that they currently move in pounds, and I would know because I used to be a truck driver, is literally like the battery would take up the whole truck. All you would transport is the battery.
Yeah.
Because of course it would. Like you think about how much energy would have to be stored to move those things and the amount of pounds, but then the whole system just has to be a battery, because batteries take up weight. There's some mass to them. So just thinking about the scale of the problem, it's so overwhelming. Another point on this is one of my, I would say I'm in this intellectual lineage of this professor at University of Oregon, connected with a lot of professors who trained me. His name's Richard York. Okay. He has written a lot about as any sort of alternative sources of energy get exploited in the modern era, so this is in the industrial era, our total energy use has just increased. There is no transition from one source of energy to another. There has only been addition. So as we look into alternative sources, we just add to our total amount that we're using. Because of course we're just animals. You know, when I think about it that way, like the biological determinist side, like of course we would exploit every energy source we could possibly get our hands on.
Yep.
And then because a lot of that stuff is relatively cheap, that energy still, we make really, really stupid decisions with it. Like my example that I always say is shipping peaches from Chile to be packaged in
Thailand and come back to me in California. Let's go.
Yeah, it's
Let's go.
It's like who is choosing that? You know what I mean? So then when people say stuff like, well, we just need like nuclear energy or like some sort of alternative, like, first of all, we need to stop shipping peaches around the world. That's like, and that's just one example. Like everything is being shipped around the world like that. It's so stupid just to exploit cheap labor costs, which is another like amount of exploitation. It's just human exploitation. And so to me, like, I would prefer us to not find a silver bullet that allows us to just easily transition to keeping the system as it is. Like it cannot continue as it is, even if we found a silver bullet, because there's ecosystem limits that come with that much energy use.
Right.
Like will be just other environmental disasters that come as a result of just using energy at this rate.
Right.
And so because that means you're pulling materials out of the earth to transform them and then throw them out at a different part of the earth, ostensibly. So basically I would like, and I think what is probably going to happen is we'll have some sort of energy decline, which we'll then adapt to. But if we could simultaneously find cleaner sources of energy or reusing already manufactured things to produce kinds of energy, using the sun to power things. You know, I just think constantly about mills, you know, just water wheels, like that's a source of energy. You know, there are,
it's
like,
free. It's just sitting there.
There's so many other. There are things that have been used for energy in the past that we absolutely could go back to if we scaled everything down. So ideally, I would like to see a transition into a lower energy livelihood worldwide, that then coincides with some sort of solutions coming up with, you know, more sustainable forms of energy. I remain skeptical about just renewables in general. Like, what are the externalities? Like, what are the things that aren't being, you know, measured? I think there's a lot in electric cars and solar panels and wind turbines that are not being measured at all. They're just not being part of the calculation because people just want these things to be adopted. I read something about from this like engineering journal about how like manufacturing those giant wind turbines and taking them down to service them, the amount of energy it takes to do that, to manufacture, transport, and service, makes them net energy neutral.
So it's really, like, we're just getting
what
right
are we
back
doing?
to,
like what are we doing? We're just using fossil fuels to pretend that we're making energy from these other things. And maybe they're better now, I don't know, but it's just like that. I think I'm so skeptical because I've read enough of these things where I'm just like, we just make such bad decisions as a species and a culture. Like, I don't really think that the people in charge are like responsible adults, basically. I just don't think they are. And so I don't think that they're like telling us the truth with these things. And so anyways, but I do think that like people are already finding ways to live more low carbon lives, and these are the people that I focus on, because I think like they're basically the ones innovating things and the ones we should look to in the future of low energy, I think.